we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on the experiences of Black graduate deans at primarily white institutions. Today, we have an outstanding panel, Doctors Henry Frierson, Michael Cunningham, Carolyn Hodges, and Shirley Malcolm. Our moderator today will be CGS Dean in Residence, Janet Rutledge. Go ahead and just, before we start today, we have a welcome from CGS President, Dr. Chevelle Newsom, but I just wanted to review a few quick housekeeping notes here for us before we get started. We will have both the chat and the Q&A open for the discussion today. Please submit any questions you might have to the panel via the Q&A function, and time allowing, our moderator will attempt to work those questions in the discussion. We will also be recording the session and posting the recording on the event website from where you originally signed up. So if you have to leave early or would like to review the material later on, you'll be able to find it there. We ask that you please not use a chatbot or AI summary tool today. You'll be able to, circle back and review the material there. Okay, with just those, oh, and sorry, one more thing. We do have a brief survey at the end. I'll touch on that and remind you all at the beginning. It will automatically come up when the event closes. But with all that said, let me throw it over to President of CGS, Dr. Chevelle Newsom, to get us going.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's important webinar, Black Graduate Deans' Views and Experiences at Historically PWIs. I am delighted that you have joined us for this timely and critical conversation about leadership, representation, and the future of graduate education. This webinar emerges from the recent volume of Voices of Graduate Deans in Advancing Graduate Education at Historically White Universities, published by Emerald Publishing. And I'm honored to have contributed a chapter in this important work, and I'm equally proud to serve as the president for the Council of Graduate Schools during this pivotal moment in higher education. For 15 years, we've witnessed something significant, an increased presence of Black graduate deans at predominantly white institutions. This wasn't merely representation, it was transformation. These leaders brought innovation and approaches to graduate school structures, launched programmatic initiatives that elevated student success for all students, and fundamentally enhanced the quality of graduate education overall. However, we're facing a trend of declining Black deans, and given the current political winds that are sweeping across higher education today, this decline demands our attention and action. Today's conversation is about learning from the perspectives and experiences and understanding what's at stake and charting a path forward that ensures graduate education serves all students with excellence. Without further ado, I would like to turn things over to our moderator to lead the panel, Dr. Janet Rutledge, our esteemed CGS Dean in Residence. The floor is yours.
As many times as I've done this, I should remember to unmute. Thank you, Chevelle. And I'm very excited about this panel and about this book in general. And it's really a thrill to be around people who are my peers and my mentors. And so I want to just jump right into the panel. Today we have with us Dr. Henry Frierson, who is the past Associate Vice President and Dean of the Graduate School at the University of Florida. And he is the editor of this book. We also have Dr. Carolyn Hodges, who is Vice Provost and Graduate Dean Emerita at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Michael Cunningham, who is the current Associate Provost for Graduate Studies and Research at Tulane University. And Dr. Shirley Malcolm, who's Senior Advisor to the CEO and Director of Sea Change at the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. And all of them have a tremendous history of contributions to graduate education. And I think a lot of that will come out as you hear them talk. And speaking of which, let's get right to it. So first, I'm going to ask Hank to kick off and to tell us a little bit about what was the impetus for this project, and tell us about the content of the book, how it came to be, and what you had hoped to get from it.
Thank you, Janet. And you just threw my whole presentation off. But no, I'll get to some of those points. But I just want to give an overview. And I also want to thank my colleagues for joining me on this panel, and also colleagues who are joining the webinar. But Voices of Black Graduate Deans is a special tribute to those who came before us, those who are with us now, and those who are coming after us. And a special deserved recognition I have to give to my friend Dr. Luther Williams, who was arguably the first Black graduate dean at an HWU during his 3-year tenure at Washington University, starting in 1980. Now, in my historical-based chapter that I wrote, I checked with CGS to see had there been any other deans before Russell Hamilton, who was the graduate dean at Vanderbilt University. And no one could come up with any other name than Russell. Then I happened to have a conversation with Luther Williams, who we communicate regularly, and I shared with him the final proof of the chapter. And he told me that he was the grad dean at Washington U in 1980. And I said, and so I went back to him. I wanted to change that, but the proof had been in, the book was under production, and I couldn't make that change. So I said, anytime I talk about this book, I'm going to mention the fact that Luther Williams arguably was the first Black graduate dean at an HWU in 1980. So my shout out to Luther. The genesis of our volume started in 2013. And for several years, Carolyn Hodges and I discussed the need for the few Black graduate deans at historically white universities to get together to meet and address issues germane and essential to us. Now, Carolyn and I started in 2007 together. And then finally in 2013, the late 2013, we set up a meeting with the then 8 Black graduate school deans at HWUs. We convened that first meeting and subsequent others at the PWIs building in Washington, D.C. And for that meeting or that group, we called ourselves the Graduate Dean Summit, all 8 of us. And we met at the PWIs building because we got Shirley Malcolm involved. Or I should say Shirley got herself involved. And so we conveniently met at that wonderful location. We did this pretty much up until the time COVID hit. So for full disclosure, Shirley and I have been longtime partners in making good trouble. Some people might call it making good crime. I don't know. Take your pick. But we're partners in crime. And then also I dragged Carolyn in too. So those are my crime partners. And so for this first, before the first COVID epidemic, the Grad Dean Summit typically met twice a year. After the epidemic, the group would meet monthly via Zoom. But there was something special about those twice a year personal meetings that were so instrumental to us. And slightly before that first COVID onset, we discussed developing a volume because we believed we had experiences and views in graduate education that were worth sharing. So a couple of years ago, a core number of us decided to move forward to share our voices as Black graduate deans at HWUs by preparing and contributing chapter manuscripts for a published volume. And that volume became Voices of Black Graduate Deans in Advancing Graduate Education at Historically White Universities. And with that, I thank my colleagues who contributed chapters that brought the volume to fruition. And I thank Emerald Publishing Ltd of the United Kingdom for their eagerness to publish Voices of Black Graduate Deans. Now, Voices covered the volume itself, covered three broad areas related to the presence of Black graduate deans at HWUs. First, how graduate school structures were affected or influenced by their presence. Second, the initiation of graduate education programs that positively affected students. Third, the personal reflections and perspectives of Black graduate deans at HWUs. As chapter authors, many of us had graduate school experiences that informed us how we would function as graduate deans. Notably, many of us were first-generation graduate students, and most certainly most of us, if not all, were first-generation doctoral students. From my own experiences as doctoral students, many of us knew what we did not get as doctoral students and in the type of support needed. So thus, given our experiences as doctoral students, we tended to know the type of support needed to foster graduate student success. And we promoted and advanced that support for students. Now, and students for all. Now, something happened from 2013 to 2022. Over that period, now remember, in 2013, there were 8 Black graduate deans at HWUs. That number rose from 8 to 29. With such a number, collectively, we had enough rich and unique experiences among us that could have contributed to several volumes. Voices is just a representation of our experiences and views. As Carolyn and I suspected in establishing the Graduate Dean Summit, that group was valuable to all of us. We gained support from each other through our bonding and professional fellowships, and our willingness to share information enhanced our experiences as graduate school deans. At the same time, the connections among ourselves facilitated our professional growth and helped us to be more effective as deans and higher education administrators in general. Indeed, some of us moved into positions beyond the deanship. For those individuals, the graduate school deanship became a step to university provost and president positions. Notably, over the last 12 years, the post of 9 provosts and 5 presidents, and that of our president of CGS, came from that Graduate Dean Summit group. In our roles as graduate school deans, we look to advance graduate education and to be champions for students, including being mentors and role models. We promoted success across the board again for all students. Moreover, we promoted equity and unapologetically promoted equality of opportunities. Further, we promoted improving the quality of graduate programs. Essentially, we took on graduate dean's positions to have positive outcomes for graduate students and graduate education at our universities. Collectively, Black graduate deans were quite influential and tended to be brave forces in higher education. And given the negative political winds buffeting higher education, the presence and resolve of Black graduate deans is even more crucial today. Thank you. Dr. Newsom, I hope I hit some of those things that you told me I was supposed to talk about. Dr. Rutledge also.
Yes, as someone who was a participant in those summits, I can tell you how valuable they were for me and for my career development. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Hodges.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, when I was appointed Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate School, at the forefront of everything I wanted to do was one thing in particular, which I think resonates with all the deans who participated in this work, the goal of broadening participation in graduate education. That was just so very important to me. I wanted to remap graduate education, and in the chapter I wrote, I refer to that as minding the gaps. When I took on the position, I had a charge that went far beyond being a steward of graduate education, I actually had to rebuild the graduate school because I had been decentralized several years earlier. So I was, in a sense, as a colleague said to me formerly, I was flying the plane while trying to rebuild it. And it was a huge proposition. As everyone knows, the prospect of making major changes is almost always fraught with problems, at best with a little difficulty, and at worst with a great deal of resistance. It didn't mean disrupting longstanding practices. I had a negative impact on trying to change the demographics and trying to clarify academic expectations, because I wanted to find ways to enhance participation of a more diverse population in graduate education so that students could matriculate, move on to degree attainment, and assume professional roles. But one thing that was particularly important to me, and I do focus on this, is changing the student mindset about it. I wanted to help them understand and to lead with self-confidence because they were used to waiting to be told what to do, but they needed to take the lead and to have some agency. And I even encourage them to take part in their role in shared governance, especially those who are part of our graduate council. And they did an excellent job. I hope that it would help them to explore the full benefits of collaborating with one another across their differences as they prepared, excuse me, for the future. And I found out that they could really play a vital role in changing the culture of graduate education to improve benefits for all students. Now, as far as being a part of this graduate dean group, Black Graduate Dean Group, was actually really wonderful. There are three things I want to say because it really was an essential source of support and a valuable tool in enabling me to do the kinds of things that I wanted to do. First of all, of course, it has been mentioned, and Hank said so well, it helped me to learn about ways to address challenges the students were facing and how these other deans went about transforming aspects of the status quo that kept us from moving forward. Of course, we were all engaged in the Council of Graduate Schools. We were engaged in regional and state organizations dedicated to graduate education. But the Black Graduate Dean Group brought a special, unique perspectives to sharing information about possible resources for carrying out their initiatives, suggestions about how to foster and engage internal allies. And that I found one of the hardest things to do because allies come from places that you don't expect. And they also illustrated missteps to avoid in dealing with certain constituents. Secondly, learning about their personal journeys really helped me as I reflected on my own, because they shared experiences that generally were not topics discussed openly at the professional organization. That is, what they encountered as the new, I guess you could call it, face of leadership in graduate education, since many of them, like myself, were the first Black deans in that position, and in many cases also served as one of the few Black individuals in executive leadership in higher education. And these interactions with the deans helped me to anticipate and navigate those roadblocks so that I could find ways to enhance my autonomy as a graduate dean. And third, we were from a variety of fields and types of historically white institutions, and that provided multiple perspectives upon which to draw and which really inspired us because we weren't there to compare so much how everyone was doing, but instead as a coalition to share pathways for enhancing graduate education and minding those gaps that we saw in access and attainment. So I would end by saying that all of these experiences offer lessons learned for those who would aspire to be graduate deans, as well as for those with whom the graduate deans work, such as academic mentors, department heads, directors of graduate education, college deans. And it also provides important perspectives for those to whom the deans report. By being a part of the group, I came to understand how important it was not just to count and highlight those things that we could say were victories in what we were doing, but also to really focus on continuing to lay the groundwork for those who would follow. And hopefully they would follow with the intent of collaborating not only across the institution, but also with other institutions to sustain a more broadly diverse student population and to seal those gaps that we were worried about. You know, I served as a graduate dean for 9 years. And during that time, I never could have predicted that graduate education or higher ed in general would find itself in the politically charged situation in which it now finds itself. And I think for that reason, it's all the more important that we did have a group like the one we put together and the volume which we have produced here.
Thank you very much. And next we will hear from Mike Cunningham.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you everyone as well. It's really interesting, even reading through the different chapters, how much I learned that I didn't know from just attending the summit. Because rarely in our professional careers, beyond the professorate, do we get opportunities to continue to learn about our roles in graduate education, whether we sort of worked in graduate education before or came in from outside. You know, as Dr. Hodges mentioned, the Graduate Summit was a sounding board that went beyond the CGS meetings and the Summer Institutes and our regional meetings. It was an opportunity for us to learn, to share ideas about things as well. And some of the things that happened sort of really focused on intersectional identities. It wasn't just about being a Black person in graduate education. You know, what's the distinct issue about being a Black person and a woman, or a Black person who's underrepresented as a sexual minority, or something else as well? One of the things we try to do as leaders in this space is create bridges between graduate education and for all of our constituents, and that we recognize that our presence was to center the voices of all the students, of all the directors of graduate studies and our graduate admissions officers as well, to make sure that graduate education was sort of a welcoming space. And if you notice, we also keep talking about HWI, historically white institutions versus PWI. And we talk about historically white institutions to make sure it's not just about the numbers. It's not a number counting issue. It's about putting legacy and understanding to the history and context in which grad education is sort of coming in as well. And that also impacted what we call sort of informal and formal mentoring spaces. Whether we took on that mentoring role or not, one of the things that we recognized and commented on oftentimes at these graduate summits is that we were called on to be the mentors for students in our respective disciplines and beyond. You don't know how many times people would just walk by my door and finally say, "Excuse me, may I come in and sit down and talk with you?" Just by my mere presence in that sort of space. And they would want to talk about sort of, their careers in areas that were not even linked to our disciplines, about work-life balance and finishing up and how to work with professors who may be difficult and holding them back. And or just being a minoritized person in grad education or not. I mean, we've had conversations and we've been mentors to people who look like us and not. And because of that, oftentimes that comes with sort of a tax, a TAX. Because of our roles in graduate education, we are highly visible and we're asked to serve on many committees at the university, within our regions, and all that stuff as well, which is important to make sure the voices are heard. We get asked to be advisors to senior administrators. We're the sounding boards to some of those kind of things as well when executive level education or education folks want to sort of think about ideas, they may come say, "What do you think about this as well?" And so that being a sounding board for the university is a part of that tax. And we have the privilege and the responsibility of being that sounding board for new ideas, initiatives, and responses to university announcements, if you will, to make sure that we read over those first and make sure that the announcements aren't sort of, off-putting. one of the things I do, and even teaching still, is I ask students to, read over something from your own perspective. And I say, if you're talking about a group that's not your own, replace that group with your own. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, you probably need to revise it. And so oftentimes we played that role in those universities and announcements as well. But we also took on sort of our personal experiences of what we did not get in graduate school. That oftentimes we were the first or the first cohort or the one of very few in our respective programs. And we wanted to make sure that one, whether you're the only one or the 100th person, that you felt welcome in your graduate program, regardless of your background. And because graduate education spans many disciplines, we tend to know more about issues in academic areas outside of our academic disciplines too. We all are experts in our respective fields, but in grad education, we get to know a lot more about sort of the prelim process or the committee process in different disciplines and how to advise students on that as well. We also try to create graduate spaces that did not exist when we were in graduate school, as I said earlier. In fact, we tend to receive stories of difficulties experienced in grad educations, whether they're from students or faculty members, about how to deal with a faculty member that may not be very supportive of a student, or a faculty member who's saying my students aren't doing X, Y, and Z. Thus, we strive to create graduate education spaces that are welcoming to all students, regardless of their backgrounds. No, while the edited volume is written from the perspectives of Black graduate deans, I would argue that the voices represent all of graduate education in all of its complexities and perspectives. So this volume may be a helpful tool for anyone interested in graduate education in the U.S., and I would invite you to read it as I've enjoyed reading it myself. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Shirley Malcolm.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be able to join this group, as I was honored to be the mascot for the team. For Dr. Frierson and I, this was not our first rodeo. Basically, as he said, we had been getting into trouble for decades. And I think that but the idea of coming together as deans was incredibly powerful. I learned a lot. Okay, I had spent a career trying to move the numbers in STEM and trying to do something about that. But I learned from Dr. Hodges that STEM wasn't the only one with problems. And that was really important because she came at this from a humanities perspective, and it was the same thing. So that kind of does a reset to your brain, that it isn't just the field, that it is essentially the system. And those were, I think, important things to come to understand. And right now we are in a critical time because in graduate education, because we are in a critical time in higher education. It is all in turmoil. And I think that it's like, what is today's headline? That's kind of the perspective that you all have to take. There is general instability in higher education. There are leadership issues. We are turning over presidents like crazy. We are turning over provosts like crazy. We have governance concerns all over the place, where essentially boards are not standing with presidents or their deans or what have you. We have threats to institutions because of federal actions, canceled grants, which have been the source of a lot of graduate stipends and support, research funding withheld. In many cases, institutions weren't able to say how many graduate students they should take because they didn't know how much money they had or if they would have any money at all. Most places have signaled a willingness and eagerness to at least protect the people the graduate students that they did have. But it has been like this period of like total chaos and confusion. The international student issue. How many Are we going to get visas for these students? Are they going to be able to come in? It's as they say, it's been one thing right after the other. And given the role of graduate students in many of our institutions where they have responsibility, for example, as TAs and RAs, and we need them in order to run the institutions to play that role, that uncertainty has destabilized the entire framework of higher education. There's decreased availability of fellowships. For example, in the National Science Foundation, just talking about the STEM areas, in the National Science Foundation, they're providing half the numbers of fellowships that they did. They did up the numbers a bit in certain disciplinary areas, but they targeted those disciplinary areas as opposed to looking broadly at issues of merit. So there are all kinds of uncertainties that are going on. The changes, this added with the changes in the rules about borrowing, how much you can borrow for graduate education, all of this introduces even more chaos. The Black graduate deans at historical white institutions have always operated in a space of uncertainty. And I think that because of that, there's kind of less fear about kind of moving ahead. You just move ahead, you move through, you do what has to be done, and you serve everyone. And I think that this has been an important message, that in our efforts to make sure that we're serving those who are least, who have been least well served, what we end up doing is making space for everyone. And that is an important part to remember going forward. Very student-centered, really, in a way, responding to what we did not get. And I think that is absolutely critical. I just want to say I received my PhD 51 years ago. So I'm an old timer, and I know what was missing. And I heard those same things being echoed. And it was like, are we ever going to get this right? And I think that this was an important conversation that needed to be had. Right now, with a lack of leadership at the top, what we ended up doing at the top, what we ended up doing is we have to lead from the middle. And deans take on even greater importance in that space. Deans and department chairs take on even greater importance in that space. I was fortunate, honored to be invited to add to the volume. And in my case, I added the foreword. That meant I had to read everything that everybody wrote and try to make a story, a kind of a compelling narrative out of it. I don't know if I was successful, but I at least tried. Okay. And then at the end, on I think the last day of submission, I added an afterword. I read the afterword, and it was incredibly prescient and scary because it essentially kind of said, this is where we're headed. And where we are now is where we were headed. So to finish, I want to say, what next? Okay, what next? Universities have to stand up. You have to stand up. You have to lean into system level change. I actually believe that that having to do the work, no matter what, is the best way to start, because it essentially it focuses the mind. This has to be done. And so how do I do it in a way that I'm not tearing out the infrastructure that has supported graduate education and that really needs to continue to support graduate education? So on a note of optimism, because since everything is being torn down, you have the opportunity to build it back correctly. And I take my lead from Carolyn Hodges and say, yes, build a plane while you're rolling down the runway. And thank you for that metaphor.
Well, thank you very much. And that leads us very well into some conversation. I'm already seeing some things in the chat. I want to remind people that the chat is for comments, and if you have questions, to use the Q&A button, and we will get to that in just a moment. So looking across the chapters, and for those of you who haven't seen the book, there are many more graduate deans that were involved than what we were able to have in this webinar. But one of the themes was being change agents. And Shirley, you laid out very well the times that we're in now. And, change is here. Change it's in a whirlwind right now. So talk a little bit about, and this is to any of the panelists, talk a little bit about how we can learn from the changes that we've been through to help guide us through this period of uncertainty now.
I think when we served as deans at our respective universities, we were going through uncertainty, just our presence, because our approaches were in many cases outside the so-called box.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's related to what we experienced when we were going through our doctoral programs. And I think that if I was dean today, I would continue doing what I did for 14 years when I was at the University of Florida's dean. I would continue in spite of the forces that are propping up against that. And I mentioned the fact about bravery. And in these times, bravery is called for, not kowtowing, not buckling and folding, but bravery is called for. And be that as it may, at least you put forth the effort to do the right thing for the university and for the students.
I'll follow up to what Hank was saying as well. And so in doing that, we always center students. Students are why we're in these positions, they're why we stay in these positions, and they're the people with whom we advocate for as well. And when I first took on my role over a decade ago, there was not a policy for students to take family leave if they got pregnant while they were in graduate school. And many of the students were terrified to talk with advisors about changing things that would happen in their lives for the fear of losing their stipend or their tuition waiver or what have you. And so, we did some research, and as a researcher, I know from federal agencies that most federal agencies have family leave policies and grants. And so we wanted to make sure that the students who were not on grants had the same opportunities as students who were on federal grants at the institution. So through my leadership with the Graduate Council, we passed a family leave policy for graduate students. And there was some initial pushback. Some of the academic deans, sort of said, where's the money going to come from? Who's going to support these students when they do this kind of as well? We're going to have all these students who want to have babies. I'm like, okay, let's be real now. How many students go to graduate school and say, oh, I want to have a baby right now? And this policy has been in place over 10 years, and it's had a wonderful experience for our students to know, one, you never know when life changes are going to occur, but you want to make sure it happens in a place that's supportive of who you are as an individual, regardless of your sort of racial or ethnic background. And it also corresponds to the timing and the age of a lot of our graduate students. And see, people shouldn't have to postpone, their personal lives to receive a degree. But think about how they can do some of these things in tandem and how that was really important too. And so I had the support of the provost in putting this policy through. So having support from senior leadership is also very important as well. And we have not had an adverse impact on anybody's budget from any of the academic units or schools with this policy in place. But again, you have to do some of these things to make sure that we center students and center students' experiences and who they are.
And I would agree with what both gentlemen have said. I would continue to do what I decided I needed to do. It's a matter of really having an adaptive strategy to get it done. You might have to take a different route to do it, but that strategy does not go away. And I found students to be a very powerful weapon or tool, I should say, in getting that done, because I empowered them to, okay, you need this. I agree with you. Sit down and do the background on who's doing it, how you do it, and how it might be done. And they were often able to sell that better than I could necessarily to those to whom I reported. But it is about being able to adapt to those forces around you that would maybe prevent you from doing that, or believe that, you're in a certain box, you stay over there. Well, you don't have to do that. You have this strategy. There are different ways of getting at it. And your example of the family leave is a perfect one, because I went through the very same thing, and we did end up having one that was very good and is still in place.
Yeah, I am not a dean, okay? But I live in the policy space. And let me just say, every institution has policies, including universities. They may have more than anybody. But the point is that in many cases, you have not only institutional policies, but you have federal rules that you can basically drag out in order to do what you want to do, or you basically threaten federal rules. We better do this before there's a law about it. I mean, so it means that in many cases we have to shift our narrative from this is the reason we want to do this to these other four things are the reasons that we want to do this. And I think that to a certain extent, we all carry those other four things in our pockets, and you drag them out as needed in order to justify what has to be done. And I say this realizing that these are still unstable spaces, and right now, with a certain amount of chaos going on, there's actually an opportunity to get more done.
Those are all great points. I'm seeing some topics coming up in both the chat and in the questions. So I'll first steer this to you, Hank, and then let others chime in. There's interest in understanding how this group engaged with deans at HBCUs. And I know that some of the summits were joint, and then there was a decision made to split them up. So Hank, can you talk a little bit about that history?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. When Carol and I discussed forming the summit, we also agreed that it would be appropriate to have the deans HBCUs involved. And they were involved in the first group. And for several years, the summit included HBCU graduate deans and Black graduate deans at HWUs. And at a point, some of the deans at HBCU said that the topics and issues that you all are dealing with are so different from ours. And my response was yes. And what's needed is for the HBCU deans, graduate deans, to get together on a regular basis We didn't say that you had to leave the summit, but the recommendation was that given the topics that are so critical for you all as deans of HBCUs, you should form a group and meet. And eventually they did. So there is an HBCU dean primarily comprised of schools that are R1s and R2, since Howard is now an R1. So rest assured that we engage with HBCU deans. And that was at the very beginning, and this occurred for a fair number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And that group of historically Black graduate schools tends to meet annually at the conference of the Southern Graduate Schools meeting,
Yeah.
because most HBCUs are in the South. And so it's a pre-conference to the CSGS conference as well.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, there were actually many more participants who were not members of HBCUs at the pre-conference as well. So there was synergy. That also leads into opportunities for mentorship and interaction, because that meeting happens to be right before the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools meeting, that there was an opportunity to sort of meet before and continue that discussion with the larger group within the Southern region. And that happened as well. And where you would find out about many more opportunities within historically white institutions for leadership and all those kind of things, and synergy to go back and forth. So those conversations still occur, and that meeting happens every year. And in fact, it's happening in the spring in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. And on a personal note, as a retired graduate dean, I am intimately involved and engaged in my colleagues at HBCUs, graduate schools. So my work primarily is with HBCUs at this stage of my life.
And I think one of the other things that came out in some of these meetings is a lot of us had our undergrad degrees that came from HBCUs too. And so there was sort of this sense of obligation and legacy and connection to these groups too.
But let me say that I wear a different hat with regard to HBCUs, and that is I'm a regent of one. And looking at the kind of graduate issues that we face within the institution, they include things like actually trying to build the kind of infrastructure that we need in order to be able to support PhD programs. And these are important issues especially for the R2s that are aspiring to R1, and they will need to be able to tap into the brain trust that is represented by this group, who have had to live with that infrastructure or rearrange that infrastructure in terms of building out what they need to support the graduate programs that are increasing in size.
Thank you. The next two questions deal with the path to the deanship and the experiences as being a Black dean in the roles, and how you are perceived, how people might treat you differently. So the first question is, do you have any advice for someone who has voiced interest in dean level opportunities at a university and was not taken seriously?
My advice is to go somewhere else. And probably the best path. Now, my suggestion for folk looking to go into administration is to be sure that you are a full professor. To me, that's critical.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a full professor, you can tell people to go to hell. Nobody's going to bother you. I've said this many, many times, you know. So you're not worried about whether people like you or not.
Mhm.
It's going to stop you from getting tenure, and I mean not tenure, but promotion to full. You're already there. The other thing that you may want to consider is looking at associate dean positions at the graduate schools to kind of give you a foundation of what graduate education is like. And then learn from that and then move on. But what is really critical, if you're going to be a dean, particularly at a white university, you cannot be a wimp. Because if you're a wimp, you're not serving anybody but yourself. And at this stage, we don't need wimps.
Yeah. Yeah.
You also can't be selfish. When you take on these leadership roles, it's not about, I need to have another line on my vita. I need to get promoted here, there, and the other. I mean, this really is sort of a service opportunity. I
Yes.
take this leadership role as a responsibility, but I also think about how I get the respect of my colleagues and other administrators is because of my scholarship. I mean, I happen to be my academic appointment is in the Department of Psychology, and I was hired in the Department of Psychology in 1996 at Tulane, and I was the first Black faculty member they ever hired in that department. And I didn't look at Tulane as my marker of success or failure. I kept up with the people in my field, and so I always tell people, my piece of advice to anyone is that you work for the job you want, not for the job you have. And so if you want to be a dean, then take on leadership positions and make sure your scholarship is in the point where others perceive you as a senior leader in your field.
And I would add to that, yes, Dr. Firestone is right. You have to look at other places and see what they're doing. But you also has to make it clear what you're able to do in leadership in the place where you are, so that you can put that down and say, this is what I want to do, and this is how I think it can be done. You do have to make sure that you are willing to keep people accountable based on what policies are and how they should be administered. That's very important. But you have to do your homework and look around. And sometimes participation in activities at professional organizations can help as you decide that you do want to move forward. Those connections outside of your university as well as within the university. I think that made a huge difference for me. Although I stayed a good while being dean there, I saw things open up so much more once I had connections with people, especially Black deans at other universities.
And I think that it's important that you be true to yourself and not be concerned about what other people think of you. Because if you're obsessed with what people think of you, then that's going to stifle you.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just say, the last thing you want to do is to go somewhere where they ask you to be who you are not.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that there are enough openings that are out there now because people are fleeing, they're retiring, they're meriting, they're doing all kinds of things because they just tired of the chaos, that opens up opportunity. But you have to be able to articulate the vision about what you would bring to that setting. And the answer is not a continuation of where you have been, because this is not the time that calls for that.
So there's a question about formal leadership development programs and how do those work and what is their role also in having mentors and champions, sometimes called sponsors, who help you navigate to opportunities?
Well, I haven't taken advantage of any of the the leadership programs in the academies, but I have had the opportunity to have wonderful mentors. And sometimes, and even in the roles that I've taken on, I've taken that role saying, I want to make sure I learn in this role, and I want to continue to learn in this role. And so if this is not a space for me to ask questions and to learn, then maybe I'm not the person you want in this leadership role.
You know, it's really hard to find those opportunities. In-house, they often don't do them. They'll say, okay, you're a full professor. Okay, you're good to go. Well, that doesn't really necessarily make you ready to go, because especially when you get into tough positions of holding people accountable and making sure they do what they're supposed to do when they're trying to do something different. So it does mean, as was mentioned, having good mentors and reaching out and having a circle of mentors. You're mentoring students and other faculty, but you need your circle of mentors as well to help you move forward, being able to confide in them and talk with them about what you're facing. I mean, I had Hank on speed dial, and we met when we first were beginning our dean jobs, but I had him on speed dial after a while, and we would talk about all kinds of things that were going on, and that makes a huge difference for what you can do. I mean, people get upset when you make a decision and it's based on a policy. And I just finally said to someone one day, I said, read the policy in the catalog. It doesn't have my name on it. That's not Carolyn's policy. That's the graduate council's policy. Faculty decided on that. So, you know, that's the way it is. So they forget that, and you cannot take that personally. You can't be bothered about that because every day somebody else has a complaint. But having the good mentors really does make a difference.
Yeah, the connections, establishing the network,
Yes.
communicating
You
with
have a lot of
people.
social capital
That's
within the
right.
network. That's the other thing, because we are not just kind of individuals coming as individuals. We are ourselves connected to lots of other places and things and advisory groups and committees and boards and what have you. So that's one of the things that was so wonderful about the Dean's Group. And that is the social capital that was sitting inside of that group, not just from their roles as deans, but from all this other stuff that they were involved in.
Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time period. We knew that this was never going to be enough time once we got started in the conversation. But Hank, 1 minute, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, again, I want to thank you all. I want to thank the people that joined us, and just, you know, some of you all know where we live if you're interested, and you can contact us. You know, for those who are thinking about administration, graduate deanship, which to me is the best job in higher education.
Yeah,
And
Absolutely.
I'm gonna tell you
I
why.
agree.
And this is really a cold reason too.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is that you do not have to deal with faculty. Faculty do not report to you. So there's this joke. What's the difference between a whining dog outside your door and a whining faculty member? And the answer is, when you open the door, the dog stops whining.
Well, on that note.
But anyway, I want to thank you all so much for allowing us this opportunity.
We've got lots of things going on in the chat, including that CGS is developing a mentoring and leadership program, which is wonderful to hear. I want to thank our panelists today and for sharing your wisdom. There's several expressions of thanks in the chat and in the comments. And I encourage people to get the book, read the book. It's really wonderful, and the chapters are engaging and easy to read. And thank you for attending the webinar. So, Omar, you have some closing things to.
Thank you so much, Janet. I appreciate it. Yeah, as you said, echoing your comments, thank you so much to our panel today. Thank you to all of you for attending, your comments, your Q&A, your notes in the chat and everything like that. Obviously, our members are at the heart of what CGS does. So We thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to put up a brief reminder for anyone looking to join us for the there it is. For the 65th annual meeting here in right here in Washington, D.C. from December 3rd through 6th. We have pre-meeting workshops, exciting plenary speakers, 4 days of great programming, the larger setting around with around 500 other graduate school professionals. We'd love to host you here in the nation's capital. And I dropped the event link in the group chat, so please follow that up if you're interested, and we look forward to seeing you if you already signed up. And just a quick reminder, we have a 5-question survey at the end of the session here. Just as the window closes, it'll come up, and it would certainly help us to continue to improve our programming and help serve you. So thank you again to everyone today, to Janet, to Dr. Newsom, to our entire panel. It was a wonderful discussion, and until next time, we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.